The stain on the linoleum looked like a map of my worst day, but the lottery ticket left beside it proved the murder wasn't about robbery. It was personal. I should have just driven home, but instead I walked right back into the crime scene, only to find the real killer was already waiting for me. The humidity in Montgomery, Alabama, that August evening was a suffocating blanket. I was just trying to grab a six-pack and a lottery ticket from the quick stop on the edge of town, a small, independent gas station that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the Nixon administration. I needed something cold, something quick, before heading back to my temporary construction site trailer. I'd been working double shifts, trying to save every penny, and the last thing I wanted was drama. I pushed the glass door open, the chime above sounding tinny and weak, and stepped into the refrigerated air. Behind the counter, polishing a glass display case with a rag that looked older than me, was the owner, Mr. Henderson. He was a man whose face seemed perpetually set in a grimace, a landscape of deep-set wrinkles etched by decades of what I assumed was general dissatisfaction with the world. He was known in the area, not for good service, but for his opinions. I grabbed the beer from the cooler, 2 bottles of a dark local brew, and headed for the counter. I placed them down, pulling out my wallet. "Evening, sir," I offered, keeping my tone level, professional. I've learned over the years that when dealing with people like Henderson, excessive pleasantness is either ignored or seen as a sign of weakness. Neutrality is armor. He didn't look up immediately. He finished wiping a specific spot on the glass, inspected his work with a critical eye, and only then did his gaze drift up to meet mine. His eyes, the color of weak iced tea, scanned me slowly, deliberately, from my steel-toed boots up to the faded Yankees cap I wore. The air in the tiny store seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Evening," he finally grunted, the words sounding like gravel being scraped across concrete. He didn't reach for the beer. Instead, he leaned slightly against the counter, crossing his arms over his stained polo shirt. "You ain't from around here, are you?" It was the usual preamble. I sighed internally. "Just passing through for work, sir. In and out." "Passing through," he echoed, drawing the words out mockingly. "Seems like folks like you are always passing through these parts lately, taking up space, hence messing up our neighborhoods." I kept my face blank, my hand hovering near my wallet. This wasn't new. I'd walked into hostile environments before. The trick was not to let them bait you into making a scene. Once you react emotionally, you lose the moral high ground, and in places like this, that high ground is the only shield you have. "I just need to pay for these, sir," I said, pointing at the beer. He finally reached out, but not for the bottles. He picked up one of the empty plastic six-pack rings lying near the register, turning it over in his thick fingers. "You know," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper that somehow carried to the far corners of the small shop, "it's amazing what you people think you're entitled to these days. Walking in here, expecting service, expecting respect. You people should be grateful we even let you in the door." My jaw tightened so hard I felt a muscle spasm near my ear. "You people." The implication hung heavy, thick, and disgusting in the stale air. This wasn't casual rudeness. This was deliberate, targeted malice. "Sir," I managed, my voice dangerously low, "I am a paying customer. If you can't process the transaction, I'll take my business elsewhere." He let out a short, barking laugh, devoid of any humor. "Oh, you'll take your business elsewhere? Where's that gonna be, boy? The only place around here that's open past 9 is my store, and guess what? You ain't going anywhere until I say so." He jabbed a finger toward the door, then jerked it back toward himself. "Now, I gotta ask, you got ID? Can't be too careful these days. You gotta make sure you ain't just some transient looking to cause trouble." The audacity was breathtaking. He knew who I was. He'd seen me walk in. He was escalating, fishing for the reaction that would allow him to claim I was the problem. I reached into my back pocket, slowly, deliberately, pulling out my wallet. I found my license, a clean, crisp card showing my photo and address, the one I'd used to rent my current apartment miles away. I slid it across the sticky counter. He didn't look at the address. He barely glanced at the photo. He flipped it over, studied the holographic security strip, as if trying to decipher an alien language, and then, with an almost theatrical flourish, He snatched up the beer bottles, slammed them down on the counter hard enough that the glass clinked violently, and grabbed a plastic bag. 2 beers, he muttered, punching the buttons on the ancient register with unnecessary force. The total flashed, $14.87. I placed a $20 bill next to the scanner, resisting the urge to shove it into his hand. I waited. He counted the change out, not handing it to me, but placing each bill and coin precisely next to the beer bottles, as if I were radioactive. "Have a nice evening," he spat out as I gathered my change. "You too, Mr. Henderson," I replied, my voice a forced monotone. I bagged the beer and walked toward the door, every fiber of my being screaming to turn around, to confront him, to give him a piece of my mind that he so richly deserved. But I didn't. I had to get out. I had to keep my cool. As my hand reached the cold metal of the door handle, he called out one last time, loud enough to make me flinch. "Bud, and don't come back tomorrow. We don't need your kind cluttering up our aisles." I pulled the door open and stepped back out into the thick, hot night air. The sound of that door chime ringing again felt like a judgment. I walked to my truck, threw the beers in the passenger seat, and drove away, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I replayed the entire interaction, the searing words echoing. The rage was a tight, hot knot in my chest. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept seeing his smug, wrinkled face. I thought about calling the non-emergency police line, but what would I report? A racist comment? In this county, that was often just called opinion. I resolved that I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a public complaint or a social media post. I would simply never go back. I would drive the extra 15 minutes to the Megamart next time. The next morning, I was up before dawn, scrubbing grease off an excavator engine. My muscles ached, but the physical labor helped tamp down the lingering fury. Around 10 a.m., my foreman called me over. "Hey, Jax, you got a minute? You need to swing by Quick Stop on Highway 5 before noon. Mr. Albright needs a signature on that hazardous waste manifest, and he wants you to verify the seals on the drums you emptied yesterday. Said he saw you parked near there late last night. Thought you might be heading that way anyway." My heart sank. Quick Stop. Henderson's store. I tried to argue, said I was buried in work, but Albright was insistent. The paperwork was urgent. "Just run over there, Jax. Be quick. It's just a signature. Henderson's usually there until noon." Resigned, I cleaned up, pulled on a clean shirt, and drove toward the familiar run-down facade of the Quick Stop. The sun was higher now, beating down relentlessly. As I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot, I noticed something odd. There were 2 police cruisers parked haphazardly near the entrance, lights flashing silently in the bright sun. A small crowd of neighbors, the usual morning regulars, were clustered near the gas pumps, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a routine stop. I parked a little further away, near the edge of the lot, and got out. As I walked toward the storefront, trying to keep my pace measured, I saw a detective speaking seriously with a local news van reporter who had just pulled up. The scene felt heavy, charged. I pushed the door open. The chime sounded, but this time, the store was silent. The air inside felt cold, unnaturally still. There was no one behind the counter. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow on the empty aisles. Then I saw it. Near the register where I'd stood the night before, there was a large, dark stain spreading slowly across the pale linoleum floor. And next to the stain, lying abandoned on the counter, where he'd been polishing the glass, was Mr. Henderson's rag. It was saturated, deep crimson soaking into the weave. A portly deputy, taking notes near the cooler section, looked up as I stepped fully inside. He eyed my clean work boots and my confused expression. "Can I help you, son?" he asked, his voice weary. I was supposed to meet the owner," I stammered, pointing vaguely toward the counter. "Mr. Henderson? He was supposed to sign some paperwork for my site manager." The deputy slowly lowered his notepad. He walked over to the counter, his gaze lingering on the drying pool of blood. "Mr. Henderson?" he repeated softly. He looked me dead in the eye, and his expression shifted from weary professional to something deeply grave. "Son, Mr. Henderson didn't make it in this morning. He was found about an hour ago, right here, in the middle of the floor." The deputy gestured to the stain. Looks like he got into a real bad fight with something last night. Or maybe someone. He paused, leaning in just slightly, his voice dropping low. The weird thing is, he wasn't robbed. The register is full, but whatever happened, it looks like he got the worst of it. And when the first officer arrived on scene, he found a single, brand new, unopened lottery ticket tucked right under his hand, like a calling card. I stared at the lottery ticket the deputy mentioned, my breath catching in my throat. A single ticket, left behind in the wake of such violence. It felt deliberate, theatrical, almost like a message meant for someone specific. The knot of icy dread in my stomach tightened, confirming my suspicion that this wasn't random. This was directly connected to last night. A lottery ticket? I managed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Did you check the time he bought it, or who he bought it from? The deputy gave me a long, searching look, his eyes cataloging my features, my immediate visceral reaction to the scene. We're working on that, son. The owner handles his own inventory and sales logs manually. It's going to take forensics a while to piece together the register activity from last night. But you said you were here? When exactly? I knew I had to be careful, cooperate, but reveal nothing that could possibly implicate me in the gruesome scene now laid bare. I was furious at Henderson, yes, but I wasn't a murderer. I was here yesterday evening, around closing time. Maybe 8:45 p.m., I said, keeping my tone measured, trying to sound inconvenienced rather than horrified. I bought 2 beers, that was it. And what was his demeanor? The deputy pressed, pulling a small notepad from his inner jacket pocket. I recounted the exchange, sanitizing it just enough. I omitted the venomous insults, the explicit racial slurs, the deliberate provocation. I framed it as a tense, but ultimately standard, bad customer service interaction. He was rude, I admitted plainly. Very hostile. He seemed angry about me being in the store, but I paid, I took my merchandise, and I left. He never touched me. I didn't touch him. I drove straight home after that. The deputy scribbled furiously. Did you see anyone else in the store when you were here? Anyone else waiting? No, sir. It was just me and him. As I spoke, my eyes drifted back to the counter, specifically to the lottery ticket. It was bright yellow and blue, sticking out from under the edge of the heavy, old-fashioned register base. I could just make out the numbers printed on the slip, even from across the room. They looked random, a quick-pick selection, most likely. The deputy finished his initial questioning and nodded curtly. All right, Jax, stay in town. If you remember anything unusual about your interaction with Mr. Henderson last night, anything at all, you call this number. He handed me a crisp card. I took the card, nodded again, and backed out of the store, the silence inside contrasting horribly with the sudden flurry of police activity outside. I walked back to my truck, the image of that bloodstain seared into my mind. Karma, I had thought yesterday. A satisfying, yet abstract, concept. Today, karma looked very real, very messy, and very final. I started my truck, the engine roaring to life, a welcome sound of normalcy. I had paperwork to sign, and I needed to report back to the site, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the investigation was going to look closely at anyone who harbored ill will toward the victim, and I certainly harbored ill will. I drove toward the main highway, but instead of heading toward the construction site, I made a sharp turn toward a small diner across town, a place far removed from Henderson's neighborhood. I needed coffee, and more importantly, I needed time to think. I sat in a quiet booth, the deputy's card burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled out my phone, intending to call my foreman, but my thumb hovered over my contacts list. Should I mention the racist comments now? Tell the police that Henderson had explicitly threatened me and insulted my race? It might paint me as a sympathetic witness, or as a prime suspect with a clear motive. Just as I decided to call the detective on the card, my phone buzzed with a text message. It wasn't from my foreman. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened the message. It was a single, blurry photo attachment. It was a picture of the inside of my own pickup truck, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer was hiding just outside my driver's side window. In the foreground of the photo, resting clearly on my passenger seat, were the 2 bottles of dark beer I had purchased from Henderson yesterday evening. Beneath the photo, a short message glowed on my screen. "You should have stayed home." My blood ran cold. The person who killed Henderson was watching me. They knew I was there last night. And they clearly knew why I was angry. They weren't just leaving a cryptic clue for the police. They were sending a direct, terrifying warning to me. If they could photograph the inside of my vehicle unnoticed while I was sitting just yards away at the crime scene, they could be anywhere. They were close. Too close. I looked wildly around the diner, searching every face, every reflection in the window glass, suddenly convinced that the polite waitress refilling the sugar dispensers was my unseen stalker. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The karma Henderson received yesterday wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening act, and I was now central to the next scene, whether I wanted the part or not. I grabbed my keys, scrambling out of the booth, needing to move, needing to escape the suffocating feeling that I was already trapped. As I bolted for the exit, I nearly collided with a man leaning against the diner's front window, his face obscured by the glare of the sun, but I caught a glimpse of something familiar. A thick, dark rag, tucked carelessly into his back pocket, stained unmistakably black. The man leaning against the window didn't move as I barreled past, but the air around him felt charged, expectant. The sight of that dark, stained fabric, the texture, the stiffness, sent a jolt of icy terror through me, overriding the adrenaline of the chase. It wasn't just a rag, it looked exactly like the kind of heavy cotton Henderson used for his constant, obsessive cleaning, and it was too dark, too saturated to be anything but dried blood. I didn't slow down. I burst out onto the sidewalk, my heart hammering against my ribs, the diner door slamming shut behind me with a heavy thud that momentarily seemed to silence the world. I spun around, expecting to see the man pursuing me, ready to run for my life, but the window was now empty. He was gone. He hadn't chased me. He had simply made his presence known and then melted back into the ordinary flow of the midday crowd. I stood panting on the curb, the deputy's business card feeling brittle in my sweaty grip. The message was clear. "I know what you wanted to happen to him, and I delivered it. Now stay quiet, or I'll make you the next suspect." I couldn't go to the police with just a feeling and a stained rag sighting. They'd look at me, the last known person to have a hostile interaction with the victim, the man who wished him harm, and they'd see a convenient suspect. I needed undeniable proof. Proof that didn't involve me being present during the actual act. I remembered the lottery ticket. The deputy said it was tucked under his hand. A calling card. Why a lottery ticket? It was the only item of value left behind in a robbery where nothing else was taken. It was symbolic, or perhaps it was functional. I raced back to my truck, my mind working at lightning speed. The store was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, but I knew the layout intimately from yesterday. I drove around the block, parked a block away where I wouldn't be immediately visible, and took a deep breath. I was going back in, not as a victim, but as an investigator of my own near ruin. I circled back to the quick stop, waiting until the news van had packed up and most of the uniformed officers were congregated by the back alley, likely discussing logistics and the lack of forced entry. The main entrance was still taped, but the side door, leading to the rarely used storage room, the one Henderson always complained about locking because the latch was sticky, looked unguarded. It was a long shot, but desperation fuels terrible decisions. I slipped around the back, ducked under the tape near the overflowing dumpster, and approached the storage door. It was indeed slightly ajar. Henderson must have left it open when he came in that morning, or perhaps the killer used it for entry and exit. I pushed it open just enough to slide through, finding myself in a cramped, dusty room stacked high with cases of soda and stale boxes of chips. The air smelled of mold and old cardboard. I crept toward the main store entrance, peering through the gap where the door met the frame. The police presence was mostly focused on the front counter and the side entrance. I slipped into the main store, Al moving like a shadow toward the register area. The stain was still there, stark and ugly against the dull floor. I leaned over, trying to see what the police might have missed, focusing on the area beneath the counter. That's when I saw it. Not another clue, but a mechanism. Taped very securely to the underside of the counter almost invisible unless you were crouching low, was a small, portable recording device, the kind used for covert surveillance. It was blinking faintly, indicating it was still active. Henderson hadn't just been racist, he'd been paranoid. He was recording every interaction. My hands were shaking violently, but I carefully detached the device. It was small enough to fit in my palm. I quickly retreated back into the storage room, heart pounding a rhythm against the device's casing. I pressed play. The audio crackled to life, filled with the static of poor reception, but then Henderson's gravelly voice cut through. "You people should be grateful we even let you in the door." Then my own steady reply. The recording continued past my departure. I listened, sweat beading on my forehead, as the sound of the front door opening again played back. It was the sound of the same weak chime. Then, heavy footsteps, not mine, approaching the counter. "Evening, Mr. Henderson," a voice said. It wasn't the voice of the man I saw outside the diner. This voice was smooth, educated, deeply familiar. "You again, Larry," Henderson grumbled on the recording. "What is it this time? You didn't win?" "No, not yet," the voice replied. "But I think I'm close to solving this problem. Larry Albright, my foreman." Henderson scoffed. You can't afford to cover your debts with what you win on those cheap scratchers, Larry. You're pathetic. And you still haven't paid me back the 20 grand I loaned you for your son's tuition. You think blackmailing me over some old property dispute is going to fix that?" A sudden sharp thud on the recording, followed by a choking sound. Then Larry's voice, suddenly hard, stripped of its polite veneer. "It's not blackmail, Roy. It's insurance. You wouldn't sell me that tract of land for what it's worth. Not when you knew my son needed that scholarship money secured now. You held out, you arrogant pig. You thought you could play the big man in your little kingdom. You were always just jealous." Then came the wet, brutal sounds of a struggle, and finally, a chillingly calm exhale from Larry. "That stain on the floor is for your prejudice, Roy. The lottery ticket is for the debt you thought you could forget." The recording clicked off abruptly. I stood paralyzed in the dusty storage room, the truth a sudden, overwhelming weight. Larry, the man who sent me here, the man who needed that signature, had killed Henderson over a land deal and old financial leverage. The racist slurs yesterday had been the final spark, but the murder was about greed and perceived betrayal, not race. And Larry, knowing I was the last person to have a public argument with Henderson, had skillfully maneuvered me back to the scene, planting that text, that chilling photo of my truck, to ensure I was too scared to go to the police immediately, buying himself crucial time. I clutched the recorder. I had the evidence. I knew the killer, and I knew exactly where he was right now, back at the construction site, waiting for me to return with the forged manifest. The police wouldn't believe me without the recording, and if I was caught with it, or if Larry somehow learned I had it, the frame-up would be swift. I looked at the recording, then toward the exit. I had to play this exactly right. I walked back out through the storage room, slipping out the back door as quietly as I came in, melting back into the afternoon anonymity. I didn't drive to the construction site. I drove straight to the nearest precinct, the digital recording burning a path to justice in my pocket, knowing that one final dangerous confrontation was about to unfold, not with the victim, but with the man who used hate as a smokescreen for murder.